They say the first lie is always the hardest. That's not true. The hardest is the one you keep telling yourself, long after the mission's over. Berlin, 1961. Everyone thought the war was cold, but the city sweated secrets through its skin. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't even particularly loyal. I followed orders sometimes. Other times, I made my own. And people paid the price. There was a moment, just one, when I could have told the truth. A single sentence and none of this would have happened, but I didn't because I was scared. Maybe because I thought I knew better. Probably because I believed the lie served the mission. Definitely. I told myself it was tactical. But the truth? I lied because I didn't want to lose control. My team walked into that operation blind because I handed them the blindfolds. And when it all started to unravel, I still kept lying. Some of them never knew. Some figured it out too late. And one of them, he never came back. But if you're still listening, I'll tell you everything before. I regret saying any of this. Hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from and what time it is. I like knowing where in the world people still dare to listen to secrets like these. It was a Wednesday. Cold, wet, gray, the kind of Berlin day that seeps into your bones and makes everything feel like a memory. I was sitting alone at a table near the back of the Kreuzberg Beer Hall, sipping a stale Pilsner that had lost its fight with the foam an hour earlier. The waitress had forgotten me. Or maybe she was told to. That's when I saw it. A matchbox, just lying there. Not mine. Someone had left it on the table like it belonged. Kaufsiebau logo, same one on Karl Marx Alley, the kind of place you'd never expect a dead drop to come from. I palmed it without opening it. Didn't need to. I already knew it wasn't for a cigarette. The paper inside wasn't folded. It was wrapped around a small metal clip, tarnished but familiar. A signal. The message read, switch corridor. Tunnel compromised. Phase initiated. Clock running. That was it. I didn't know who wrote it. I didn't know how they found out. But whoever sent it had access, because switch corridor wasn't a phrase you used unless you had already made that decision for someone else. And now, I was that someone. I didn't go straight back to base. Instead, I walked to Grilitzer Park, circled twice, then crossed the canal. I needed to breathe, needed to think. If the tunnel really was blown, that meant the listening devices we planted weeks ago were either discovered or worse, being fed misinformation. Either way, someone was inside our loop. Close. I thought about burning the message, but didn't. I slipped it into my shoe, inside the lining. We'd lost a man last month because someone skipped protocol and flushed a note. Found it half-burned in a plumbing report. We were being watched more than we watched. The team was scattered across sectors, and if I pulled them too fast, it would signal panic. But waiting could mean running blind into a setup. I needed to reroute, reassign, and most of all, pretend. Everything was fine. That night, I called an unscheduled briefing at the safe house on Reichenberger Straße. No one questioned it. They trusted me back then. That's the part that still haunts me. The trust. It was too easy. I laid out a fabricated Intel packet maps, transit rotations, and intercept scenario. Syed Langley had updated the protocol. Nobody blinked. I think Carter even cracked a joke about how bad I was at lying. Funny, isn't it? The truth was, I hadn't heard from Langley in 4 days. The line had gone cold, and I didn't push it. I couldn't afford to. Not with the clock already running. That phrase, clock running, kept echoing in my head. We'd used it before, sure, but never in this context. Not from that channel. It was a phrase from a different playbook. Someone else's. The kind of phrase Dieter used, but Dieter hadn't contacted us in weeks. Last report put him underground, possibly in hiding. Or maybe worse. And yet, that message sounded like him. The structure, the cadence. Hell, even the paper felt like the kind he carried. I told myself it was a coincidence, but I knew better. I left the meeting that night with something in my gut I hadn't felt since my first assignment in Budapest. The sense that I wasn't driving the mission anymore. I was part of it, sure, but I wasn't steering. And that matchbox? It wasn't a message. It was a test. Someone wanted to see what I would do with incomplete information. And I did exactly what they needed me to do. Now, I wonder if that first lie, the one inside that box, was ever really mine. But at the time, it felt like the only choice. And that's when I knew something wasn't right. But the worst was yet to come. The next morning, I was already wearing the mask, smiling. Calm, focused. That version of me, commander, handler. Whatever title the file used, he was composed. Efficient. A man with a plan. What my team didn't know is that I was still replaying the words from the matchbox over and over, wondering if I was already inside someone else's script. And yet, I did what the job demanded. I started recruiting shadows. We needed a team, not the usual suspects. I wanted people I could trust, at least. Trust to do their jobs and keep their mouths shut. Not the kind that ask questions when the timing feels off. Carter was the first. Sharp, disciplined, too by the book sometimes, but he didn't bluff. He could get into places most men couldn't, mostly because he didn't look like a spy. Just another tired American in a wrinkled coat, blending in with the losers and the lost. Then came Helena. Don't ask me what her real name was. I don't think I ever knew. She wasn't CIA, not officially. Berlin was full of people like her. Stateless, floating between roles, sometimes ours, sometimes theirs. She had a way of looking through people, like she was already 3 steps past the conversation. I trusted her instincts more than mine. I still do. The others, Miller, Shaw, even young Ortega, they weren't supposed to know each other. Compartmentalization. But I was the common thread, the one stitching together a team for an operation that didn't officially exist yet. Problem was, I hadn't told them the full story. The intel packet I showed them was curated, sanitized. What I didn't include was where the information came from, and that I couldn't verify its origin. A contaminated source, maybe compromised by the Stasi, maybe worse. But admitting that would have meant freezing the mission. And I couldn't afford to stop. I lied by omission. I told myself it was for operational integrity, for their safety. Truth is, I was scared. Not scared of the Soviets. Not scared of getting caught. Scared that if I hesitated, I'd lose control. Of the board, you see, leadership in the field isn't about orders. It's about illusion. You make people believe you know what's coming next. And in that belief, they act. They risk. They obey. So I played the part. We met in fragments briefings on trains, whispered exchanges in graveyards, a fake photo studio in New Cologne. Every meeting rehearsed, every detail precise. But I could feel it already. Cracks, the kind you pretend not to notice, hoping they'll stay small. Helena started asking questions. Why this route? Why now? Who authorized the reroute? I deflected, redirected, gave her just enough to keep moving. But she knew. She always did. One night, after a particularly tense exchange near the old railway yard, she looked at me and said, "You're not building a team. You're hiding something. And you're using us to cover it." I didn't answer. I just lit a cigarette and looked away. She didn't press. That silence between us? It was louder than any siren. Still, the mission moved forward. Because it had to. Because the clock was running. And because I had already pulled too many strings to stop it now. There's a moment in every op where momentum replaces logic, where you stop asking, should we, and start focusing only on how fast can we. We had passed that point. What I remember most from that phase isn't the meetings or the plans. It's the look in Carter's eyes the day I handed him the wrong coordinates. Not suspicion, not doubt, just trust. Blind, stubborn trust. And I used it. Maybe I was just a pawn too. Maybe we all were. But I chose the lie. And once you choose the lie, you become it. What none of them knew, what I barely admitted to myself, was that someone else had already chosen us. And that person? They were about to move their next piece. 3 days before the breach, I received a package. No return address, no markings. Just a plain manila envelope tucked under my door at the flat. On McKernstrage. Inside, a reel-to-reel tape, labeled in pencil Zoo Gang 9C. The kind of label you only saw from East Berlin archives. The kind the Stasi used when they wanted you to think it was a mistake. I played it that night. The audio was rough, clipped. Someone had filtered it through radio static or maybe shortwave. Distortion. But the voices were there, familiar. One of them was mind brief, mid-conversation, asking about drop locations. The other voice, I knew it. It belonged to someone on my team. I just couldn't tell which one. The sound was bent, warped. By interference. Could have been Carter. Could have been Shaw. Even Helena, if I was being honest with myself. But no matter how many times I played it back, rewound, slowed it down, I couldn't isolate it. That was the game. They wanted me to suspect, not to know. And it worked. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat by the window, watching the trams pass through fog, listening to the soft clicks of the tape spinning in the background like a metronome marking doubt. The next morning, I wore the doubt like a second skin. Every glance, every breath, every delay, it all became potential proof. Shaw took too long to respond to a question. Helena skipped a beat before confirming a location. Carter kept tapping his pen. Paranoia in Berlin isn't a symptom. It's a skill, and I was sharpening mine. I tried to trace the origin of the tape, but the channel was dead. No follow-up, no confirmation. It was a ghost signal meant to destabilize. And it did, but something kept gnawing at me. The phrasing. One sentence on the tape caught me. Secondary corridor will be clear by dawn. He won't suspect it. I wasn't on that corridor detail. But someone knew that I'd be the one listening to the tape, that he might have been me. So either the Stasi was bluffing, trying to rattle my frame, or the leak was deeper. Closer. Someone feeding breadcrumbs to both sides. Someone playing both pianos. I tested the team. Subtle changes. Shifted rendezvous points by minutes. Sent fake updates through the internal channel. Only one of them bounced back with knowledge. They shouldn't have had. Helena. She mentioned a corridor switch before I briefed it officially. Just a slip, a single phrase. But it made the hair on my arms stand up. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. Or maybe I needed to believe she was still clean. I wasn't sure anymore if I was looking for the traitor or protecting them. That's the part I still can't reconcile. The doubt became a fog. I stopped trusting the reports, the team, myself. And that's when I made the worst decision of all. I said nothing. I let the mission run forward and changed. Because I'd rather face danger than fracture the illusion of cohesion. Maybe that makes me weak. Or maybe it makes me exactly what the agency needed. Someone willing to keep the lie alive, even if it killed us. The tape disappeared 2 days later. I'd left it in a locked cabinet. When I returned, the lock wasn't broken. It was gone, removed, clean. No one admitted to touching it. No one should have even known it existed. That's when I knew. The traitor didn't just exist. They had access. They were watching me, and I was about to give them exactly what they needed. I spread the map across the table at the safe house on Reichenberger Straße. Faded lines, Soviet checkpoints, old tram routes, nothing unusual. Except it wasn't. The real one, the original, lay folded in my coat pocket, untouched, the ink still smelling of damp paper and graphite. This one, the one I laid out for the team, had been altered, subtly, enough to change the route by 4 blocks, just enough to redirect them into a corridor we'd never used before. Carter was the first to spot it. "We're going through Alti." "Jakobstraße, no?" he asked, frowning. "Last I heard, that sector was blacklisted." I shrugged. Told him Langley had new data. Satellite confirmation. Reduced patrol cycles. He didn't press. None of them did. That was the problem. They wanted to believe we were one step ahead, but I wasn't ahead. I was improvising, trying to stay afloat in a river whose current I no longer understood. The coordinates I gave them weren't random. They were based on what I hoped was Safe Zone's guider once described in passing, back when we trusted him. But I hadn't heard from Dieter in weeks. And now I was using ghost intel from a ghost contact, trying to keep my own team in the dark, because I couldn't be sure who was watching, or who was listening. That night, I stood on the roof of the safe house, smoking a cigarette down to the paper. The city was quiet in that thick, heavy way Berlin gets when it's holding its breath. Streetlights flickered. Dogs barked blocks away. The kind of silence that makes a man start hearing things from inside. Helena joined me, wordless. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You're pushing us into blind spots," she said finally. Not an accusation, just a fact. I didn't answer, because she was right. The map I gave them would take us away from known Soviet checkpoints, but also away from extraction points, surveillance cover, and all our fallback plans. We weren't rerouting, we were isolating. And she knew it. "You sure about this intel?" she asked. I nodded. And that was the lie. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I watched her eyes. She didn't believe me, but she didn't challenge me either. That's how you know someone's lost faith. They stop arguing. When we descended into the planning room again, I saw how the lie had already spread. Ortega was triple-checking transit logs. Shaw was mapping escape routes. I hadn't. Authorized. They felt it something off, but they couldn't name it. I'd built it that way. I told myself it was for their protection, that the fewer people knew the truth, the less risk of exposure. But deep down, I knew it was for me. If I gave them the real map and it led us into a trap, the blame would be shared. But if I gave them a false one and we walked out alive, own the win, quietly, alone. Paranoia makes cowards of us all. And cowards make excellent survivors. The last mark I made on that map was an X near a warehouse. Old Soviet logistics, long abandoned, or so we believed. It was supposed to be a waypoint, but I had no proof it was clear, no confirmation. Just a hope. Hope is not a strategy. But in Berlin, sometimes it's the only currency we had left. As I folded the map and handed it to Carter, I caught Helena watching me. Not suspicious, just hollow, like she'd stopped expecting answers. That was worse. There's a kind of silence between agents that's louder than gunfire. You feel it in your teeth. That night, as we packed gear and weapons, my hands shook. I told myself it was the cold, but I knew better, because once you hand someone a false map, you're not just lying about the route, you're lying about the destination. And that X I drew on the edge of the page, it wasn't just a WIPOINT. It was a cross. And maybe we were already digging the grave. We moved before dawn. Quiet boots on wet stone, breath held in shallow bursts. eyes scanning for movement that never came until it did. The route felt wrong from the start. Too still. Not the usual background noise of a waking city, no barking. Dogs, no old trams clanking through Schlesisches Tor. Just silence, pressed against our ears like water pressure deep underwater. But no one said a word. The modified path I'd given them took us down Dresdener Straße, past a shuttered bookshop, and into an alley between two defunct factories. I remember the smell like metal filings soaked in rain. Ortega was ahead, checking the edge of the junction when the lights hit us. Harsh, white, and close. VOL, KSPOLIZEI. 3 cruisers. No sirens, blocking both exits. Floodlights flared from the yellow. Roofs, and the voice amplified, mechanical ordering us to step out, drop bags, hands in the air. I froze, because this wasn't part of any plan, not theirs. Not ours. This was improvisation, built on betrayal. Carter looked at me like I'd been the one holding the flashlight. "We're burned," he whispered. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Or maybe, because I did. And that was the worst part. I told the team to scatter. Classic fallback. Pairs into separate alleys, regroup in 20. It should have worked. It always had. But Carter didn't move. He just stared at the floodlights, breathing hard. "Now!" I shouted. And still, he didn't move. That's when I knew something else was broken. Helena grabbed the bag from Ortega and vanished into the dark. Shaw went the opposite direction. I stayed half hidden in the doorway of a decaying warehouse, watching Carter race. His hands slowly, like he was already at peace with whatever was coming. They didn't shoot. They took him. Clean. Two clean. No backup sirens. No struggle. No search sweep. Just Carter, compliant and quiet, stepping into the cruiser like he'd been waiting for the invitation. The moment they drove off, I finally exhaled. It felt like the last honest breath I took in Berlin, when we regrouped at Fallback, an abandoned church cellar near Mariannenplatz. No one said it out loud, but the look in their eyes was the same. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a signal. Someone had fed them the corridor. Someone with access to the altered map. Someone who knew we'd be there. And the only person who had all the versions of that map was me. But no one said it, because no one wanted to know. I told them Carter must have taken a wrong turn. Bad timing. We'd extract him. We'd adapt. They nodded. Mechanically. But trust doesn't break with a gunshot. It breaks in silence. Helena stayed behind after the others left. Lit a match, stared at the flame, then blew it out slow. "You said it would be clean," she murmured. I didn't correct her, because I had said that. And I had lied. She left without another word. That was the night I started dreaming in static. I'd wake up with the taste of iron in my mouth, heart pounding like I'd heard a confession I wasn't ready for. Because deep down, I didn't just fear that someone had betrayed us. I feared I had pushed Carter straight into the trap. And the scariest thought? Maybe he knew. Maybe that's why he didn't run. Because Carter wasn't caught off guard. He was surrendering to something I hadn't dared admit, and that meant he was already gone, long before they took him. I didn't sleep after they took him. The others did shallow, twitchy sleep, but I lay there on the cellar floor, counting the cracks in the concrete ceiling, like they might spell out a way to undo what I'd just done. At first light, I requested an extraction window. Standard protocol. Langley responded with one word: delay. Delay. That word rattled louder than a gunshot. We were compromised. We had a man down. And their answer was a pause. I knew what it meant. They wanted to see how the rest of us would react. How I would react. That afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror in a cafe bathroom, tie crooked, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. My reflection didn't blink, just stared back like it wanted to ask me something I didn't want to answer. I met with an internal debrief officer Cody name, Victor, at an embassy substation posing as a defunct travel agency near Tiergarten. He looked tired. I looked worse. Walk me through it, he said. So I did. But not all of it. I left out the matchbox. I left out the altered map. I left out the doubt. Instead, I told him Carter had frozen, that he panicked, that we split as per contingency. Victor didn't interrupt, just nodded like he already knew what version of the truth I'd serve him. Then he pulled out a thin manila folder. Inside, surveillance stills, grainy shots of Carter walking unrestrained alongside two Volkspolizei agents near Alexanderplatz. No cuffs, no tension. Just conversation. I felt something twist in my stomach. You're telling me he gave himself up? I asked. Victor shrugged. We're asking you. It wasn't a briefing. It was an interrogation. I just hadn't noticed. The mirror on the wall until then. That's when it hit me. They weren't trying to understand what happened. They were trying to decide if I had lost control, or worse, if I was the one who led him into it. I held my ground. Told them Carter had always been stable, loyal, quiet, that none of us saw this coming. And in saying that, I lied again, because I had seen something. A few days before the mission, I'd caught Carter staring at the embassy building from a tram window, not scanning, not observing, just staring, like he already knew he wouldn't be coming back. Victor leaned back, folded his hands, and said, "We need to know if he talked." I nodded. But inside, something pulled, because Carter didn't look like a man about to talk. He looked like a man about to trade. That night, I reconvened the team. Helena sat on the edge of a folding cot, arms crossed, jaw set. Miller checked the radio every 5 minutes, as if someone might finally say something that made sense. And me? I played my part, told them Carter was alive, that we had eyes on him, that the agency was negotiating a retrieval. All of it fiction. But I delivered it like gospel, because sometimes silence is the only weapon left when the truth is fractured. Real interrogation wasn't happening in that travel agency. It was happening in me. Every move I made now was a question. Would they follow? Would they defect? Would I? Because if Carter had turned, and if someone inside was feeding the other side, then this wasn't just a botched op. This was a slow bleed. And the cut had come from inside the bone. It happened 2 nights later, in the tunnel beneath Nolander Flats. I hadn't used that access point in years, since the early relay runs in 59, when Berlin still felt like a puzzle we could solve. The place was damp, with broken tiles and graffiti layers older than the war itself. Smelled like rust and wet paper. A good place to vanish or to be forgotten. That's where Dieter finally showed up. I almost didn't recognize him. Gaunt, hair gone gray, coat 2 sizes too large. But it was the way he stood that gave him away, slouched, like a man used to being overlooked. You took your time. I muttered. He didn't smile. Just reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn photograph, and handed it to me. Carter. Standing beside a Soviet officer near Friedrichshain, smoking, smiling. I stared at it. Not because I didn't believe it, but because some part of me already had. You're sure it's recent? I asked. Dieter nodded. A week ago. Silence settled between us like dust. Then he said it. He's not just talking. He's working. The words didn't shock me. Not exactly, but hearing them aloud, that did something else. It confirmed a suspicion I'd buried so deep, I thought maybe it had died. I asked him why he was telling me now. Dieter looked tired. Because it's already moving. You were never meant to see the second phase. What phase? Phase? He didn't answer. Instead, he sat down on a cold concrete step, lit a match, let it burn almost to his fingers. I brought him in, he said. I blinked. What? Carter. He wasn't turned. He chose it. Came to me. Said he wanted out of the loop. Said your plan was going to get them all killed. I felt my jaw tighten. My fists closed without thinking. Your people trust you, Dieter said, voice low. But he didn't. Not after the reroute. Not after the ambush. I couldn't speak, because deep down, I understood what Carter must have seen. The cracks in my leadership. The hidden moves. The matchbox. Maybe he didn't betray us. Maybe he was just hedging his bets, trying to stop the bleeding before it spread. I asked Dieter what Moscow offered him. He shook his head. Not much, but it wasn't about what he'd get. It was about what he couldn't let you do. That hit harder than any confession, Dot. It wasn't loyalty that broke him. It was. Conscience. Dieter stood up slowly. They know about the shipment. About the warehouse switch. It's not just Carter. There's someone else on your side feeding them. I didn't ask who, because by then, I didn't want to know. We walked in silence back toward the surface. Rain was falling hard. My coat stuck to my back like a second skin. Dot at the exit ladder. Dieter paused. There's still a way to contain this, he said. But it means changing the objective. I stared at him. Changing the objective meant sabotaging the payload. It meant rerouting. Again, it meant losing what we came for, but it might save the team. What was left of it. I nodded. He started up the ladder, then stopped halfway. One more thing, he said without turning. He told me something before the handover, about you. I waited. Dieter hesitated, then finished. He said you'd rather lose a man than admit you were wrong. Then he vanished into the rain, and I just stood there, soaked, still, and unsure if the worst betrayal had been his or mine. I didn't tell the team what Dieter said. Not about Carter. Not about the leak. Not about the shift in objectives. Instead, I packed my bag in silence, rechecked the extraction gear, and walked out into the Berlin night like nothing had changed. Even though everything had, the warehouse in Moabit was supposed to be a dead, drop Russian ordnance, pilfered by a third-party broker, supposedly full of outdated communication logs and equipment scraps. That's what Langley expected. That's what I was told when the file landed on my desk 2 months prior. But now I knew better. Whatever was inside, someone else wanted it stopped. Carter, Dieter, maybe even Langley itself. The details had blurred. All that remained was this. If I let that cargo move forward, someone else might not come back. So I made a decision. One, I never wrote in any report. We arrived at the location just past midnight. Rain still fell, softer now, the kind that makes the cobblestones shine like polished glass. Miller and Ortega kept watch at the front. Helena stayed back, radio in hand, eyes sharper than ever. I broke the lock myself. Hands steady, breath tight. Inside, it was colder than I remembered. Corrugated walls, crates stacked 3 high, dust hanging like smoke in the beam of my flashlight. I found the crate marked SA93KOM.DIV. Same as in the orders. I opened it. Documents, spools of cable, Soviet transmitters. Nothing that stood out until I reached the bottom. 2 cassette tapes, unmarked. One labeled only with the number 7 scratched in pencil. The other, a blank red label. I pocketed both. No one saw. Then I resealed the crate, but I didn't leave it as I found it. I slipped the thermite charge under the second row. Not enough to raise suspicion, just enough to corrupt the magnetic components and render the tapes unusable by the time they got to processing. The mission would continue. The intel would arrive, but it would be broken, unreadable. That was the best I could do. I told myself it was for the team. That was a lie, Dot. It was for me. I couldn't let that intel reach Langley or Moscow or anyone else. Not when I didn't even know what it said. Not after what Dieter told me. Not after seeing Carter in that photo. On the way out, Helena stopped me. You took something, she said. I froze. Didn't answer. She stepped closer, her voice low. I saw your hand in the crate. I didn't deny it. Just stared at her, waiting for the inevitable question. But she didn't ask Dot. Instead, she handed me a folded piece of paper, coordinates, an alternate extraction site. Shaw's been reassigned, she said. Ortega too. It's just us now. I nodded. Dot, and for the first time since the matchbox, I realized she knew everything. Maybe not the details. Maybe not Carter's confession or Dieter's warning. But she knew I had changed the game, and she stayed anyway. That's the part that still knots my stomach when I think about her. She chose to keep walking beside me, knowing I wasn't clean. That night, we left the warehouse as the thermite started to cook. No one saw the smoke, and the tapes? One I destroyed before sunrise. The other, I still have, and to this day, I haven't played it, because there are some truths you don't verify. You just live with them and wait for the next move. She never asked for explanations. That was the first sign I should have worried. People who ask are still holding on to the idea that answers might save them. But Helena? She already knew there was nothing left to salvage. We moved safe houses 3 times after the warehouse sabotage. Not because we were being chased, because I couldn't trust stillness anymore. Every corner of the city looked like a setup. Every shadow felt late to a meeting I hadn't scheduled. Helena followed. No questions, no hesitation. Just that look. Not suspicion, not judgment, something colder. Like she was watching me become the thing I'd been trained to spot in others. It was a night we were holed up in a 3rd-floor apartment above a defunct bakery in Prenzlauer Berg. The place smelled like burnt sugar and mildew. No curtains, 1 cot, 1 radio. I sat by the window, scanning the street. She stood behind me for a long time, arms crossed. Then she said, softly, I read the report you left for Langley. I didn't turn. Clean, she added, coherent, perfectly plausible. Still, I didn't speak, because I typed every word of that report like a eulogy I didn't believe. And she'd read it like a woman who had already buried too many names. I didn't mention Carter. I said eventually, I noticed. She replied. Silence stretched between us. Then she sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees up. Her voice was different. Now, not sharp, not tactical. Do you remember what you told me in '61? When we met at the canal? I shook my head, though I remembered perfectly. You said, people like us don't get to love. We get to lie, and hope someone believes it long enough to finish the job. She looked at me, then really looked. The way only someone who's already forgiven you before the betrayal can. And I believed you? She said. My throat closed, because I remembered everything about that night. The damp of the bridge rail, the way her hand brushed mine as we passed the envelope, the way she didn't flinch when I told her I'd sell her out if the mission required it. She smiled. Not kindly, just knowingly. Carter thought he was saving us, she said. You thought you were saving the mission. Maybe you both failed. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't remember what winning looked like anymore. Why are you still here? I asked. She stood, walked to the window, lit a cigarette with a match from the Café Sibyl box, the same one that started all of this. She inhaled, then turned to me, eyes calm, unreadable, because someone has to watch how this ends She sighed. That hit harder than any accusation. Helena wasn't staying out of loyalty. She was staying to witness the wreckage, to record the silence. That's when I understood maybe she'd never believed me. Maybe she just accepted me, and that's worse. Because a woman who watches you fall without trying to stop it is the last person who still sees you clearly. That night, we didn't speak again. I lay awake, hearing her breathe across the room, steady and slow, and for the first time since Carter's arrest, I wondered if she'd been protecting me all along, or waiting for the moment I'd finally destroy myself. Steinstucken wasn't really a base. It was a joke with a fence, an isolated patch of West Berlin, cut off and surrounded by the East, like a stubborn scar no one could stitch properly. A place that only made sense on maps drawn by men who never had to bleed on them. But that's where I went after everything. After the cargo, after Carter, after the look en los ojos de Helena Q, mi hizo entender Q, ya nada podía volver a su lugar. I showed up at the checkpoint with a forged route pass and 2 fingers still numb from the yaw. Cold. The guards didn't question it. I outranked everyone there. That's the thing about rank. It lasts longer than truth. The clerk behind the reception desk gave me a stack of blank debriefing forms. He said nothing. I nodded like I knew what to do. I sat at the desk, fluorescent light buzzing above me like a nervous confession, and began to write the report. It was clean. Too clean. Timelines aligned. Roles were consistent. Carter's disappearance was contextualized as operational. Stress. The intel loss was due to partial equipment malfunction. The team disbandment was standard post-mission reassignment. No mention of Dieter. No mention of the tapes. No mention of the sabotage. And not one word about Helena. I wrote it like a man writing a bedtime story for a child he'll never meet. Something soft, contained, survivable. There's a term we used in fieldwork. Null-coding. It meant submitting a report so plausible, so internally consistent, that no one would bother to question what wasn't there. The absence became the signal. This was my first full null code. When I finished, I didn't feel relief. Just silence. No one asked for clarification. No follow-up. The file was stamped, indexed, and filed away like it belonged. And just like that, it was done. Except it wasn't. That night, I walked the perimeter of the compound alone. Fog clung low to the grass. I could hear dogs barking somewhere far, and radios flickering with static. The world was still turning, despite everything I'd twisted out of shape. As I reached the northeast fence line, I saw a figure leaning against the wire, looking toward the east. Helena. She didn't turn when I approached. You didn't mention me, she said. I said nothing. She lit a cigarette. No match this time, just a plain lighter. The ritual was gone. I'm off to Prague, she added. Or so they say. I'll believe it when I'm on the train. Still, she didn't look at. Do you want me to tell them something? She asked finally. I shook my head, because there was nothing left to tell. And nothing I said would change what I'd done. She dropped the cigarette, crushed it with her boot, and walked back toward the barracks. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't need to. She knew I wasn't coming back, and I didn't. I stayed one more night. Packed my things. Left before dawn. No extraction order. No medal. No reprimand. Just absence. And a report full of lines that told the perfect story. A story where no one betrayed anyone. Where no one lied. Where everything made sense. Except that. None of it did. And now, that file sits somewhere in Langley, buried in a drawer, labeled complete. But if someone ever digs it up and actually reads it, they'll know, not because of what it says, but because of what it doesn't. They didn't fire me. They didn't thank me either. just sent a courier with a brown envelope marked for records only. Inside, a transfer recommendation, 2 blank security waivers, and a note written by a man who never used his real name. I signed it all, didn't read the fine print, because by then I understood how this worked. They don't erase you. They dilute you, slowly, quietly, until you dissolve into the system like sugar in coffee present, but impossible to separate. Over the next few months, the team unraveled on paper. Shaw was reassigned to Tunisia. Ortega sent to Bogota. Miller took early retirement heart condition, supposedly. None of them called Helena disappeared without a trace. No forwarding file, no diplomatic echo, just gone. I tried asking. Once, a friend in Frankfurt intercepted the request. Said it bounced back flagged, access beyond clearance. Funny thing is, I still had top-level clearance. But not for that. Not for her. Carter's name never surfaced again. Not in briefs, not in blacklists, not even in whispers. It was like he never existed. That's how you know an operation went wrong. Not when it's classified, but when it vanishes. When even the cover story gets buried, I stayed behind for a while, moved into a post at Tempelhof. Logistics liaison. Sounded impressive. In reality, I pushed paperwork for crates that never arrived. Men in suits came and went, speaking less each time. I became a hallway ghost. A man you nod to, but never ask about. Sometimes the silence spoke louder than any reprimand. And after a while, I started using it too. They'd ask, "What really happened in Moabit?" I'd smile. "Which version do you want?" They never pushed further, because the moment you admit the truth is bendable, everyone starts wondering if they're part of the lie too. And that's the real weapon. Not guns, not intel, not codes. Silence. The kind that protects you just long enough to forget why you needed it. I stopped writing reports, stopped asking questions, started walking longer routes home. Same trench coat, same rhythm. The city aged without me. Or maybe I aged without it. Then, one day, my clearance pass expired. Just like that. No warning, no farewell. The gate guard scanned it, blinked, and said, "System says you're no longer in." I nodded. Didn't argue, just turned around and walked away. No badge, no station, no title, just memory. And a story I'd never tell until now. Because sometimes, when you've lied long enough, the only truth that matters is the silence you left behind. And in that silence, the ghosts start talking back. It was years later. No ceremony. No date circled on a calendar. Just a night when the fog hit different, and the past felt closer than usual. I found myself near Friedrichstraße station. Didn't plan it. My feet just ended up there. The city had changed. Too bright, too clean. Tourists snapping pictures where ghosts used to stand. But the bridge was still there, Bornholmer Straße, stretched quiet under a gray sky that refused to rain. I stood by the railing, just beyond where the checkpoints used to hum, and pulled a bottle from my coat. Cheap vodka. East German label. Same brand dieter used to smuggle inside hollowed-out transistor radios. It wasn't nostalgia. It was ritual. I unscrewed the cap, let the wind breathe on it. Then I poured a small stream onto the concrete. "To Carter," I said softly. "Whatever side you chose, I hope it was worth it." Another pour. "To Helena, for seeing through me and walking beside me anyway." The wind picked up. I could hear laughter in the distance. Young voices. No idea what had been built over the wreckage. We left. Another pour. To the ones who never knew I lied to them. And then the last one. To the ones who still don't. I drank. Didn't flinch at the taste. Didn't close my eyes. Because this wasn't guilt. And it wasn't forgiveness, Dot, it was acknowledgement. A silent nod to the truth I buried under. Coded memos and null reports. A truth that never fit the frame, so I left it outside. Somewhere, in a drawer no one opens, there's a file with my name. And in that file, I'm just another agent. Mission complete. No incident. No casualties. That's the version they kept. This one? This is mine, Dot. And if someone ever finds it, this tape, this voice, this version, I hope they understand that I never wanted to be the villain, Dot. But sometimes the lie is what gets the team home. And sometimes it doesn't. They never sent for me again, Dot. No medals. No inquirers. No quiet calls in the night. I faded like a smudge on a map, like the ghost of a checkpoint no one remembers placing. The kind of disappearance that doesn't echo, it just stops. Being noticed, Dot. Sometimes I catch myself watching strangers on the train, wondering if one of them ever stood behind the mirror during my debriefings. Wondering if they knew how many lives cracked because of one decision. One matchbox, one corridor too quiet. The tape still sits in a drawer. I never destroyed it. Never played it either. Some truths don't need to be heard. They just need to exist, Dot. Waiting, Dot. Breathing, Dot. And maybe that's punishment enough. I never learned if Carter forgave me, or if Helena made it past Prague, but I remember the silence they left behind. And some nights, I toast to it, Dot. If this story lingered with you, hit subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me if you'd heard anything like this before. Maybe even tell me where you're listening from. I want to know who's still out there, quietly remembering.